Good afternoon, and welcome to our final panel of the 2022 Women in Tech and Innovation Forum, Building a More Inclusive Future. Thank you everyone who's joined us over the past 2 days. As a quick reminder, if you have any questions throughout this discussion, be sure to drop them in the Q&A tab. And if you see a question you like, click the thumbs up icon to upvote that question, and it puts it to the top of our Q&A list. We are very excited to have you here today, and I'm happy to introduce our panelists. We have Mandy Crawford, Executive Director of the Texas Department of Information Resources, and she also serves as the Chief Information Officer for the state of Texas. Payton Iheme, Head of Public Policy for North America and Latin America at Bumble, and Liza Willmore, Senior Management Executive with Accenture Strategy and Consulting Practice. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here, Christina.
Excited.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're glad that y'all could join us today to talk about this important and fun topic. I think also to talk about because this perfectly ties in also with women in innovation and technology, because we can certainly look at ways to innovate when we're talking about building that inclusive future. So I'm gonna my fellow esteemed panelists and I we're going to give you a little intro about ourselves and our journey, where we got to what we're doing today. But we want to make sure as well that we're able to address and answer any questions you might have. So like Christina mentioned, please go ahead and drop your questions in the Q&A tab, and we're happy to keep this virtual presentation as informal and organic as we can and answer your questions as they come up. So as Christina said, I'm Mandy Crawford, and for the past 3 years, I have been the Executive Director of the Texas Department of Information Resources, or DIR, which for those of you not familiar with state government is more or less the state's technology agency. And we have a variety of duties that certainly surround technology, driving strategy, cybersecurity, contracting and procurement, and all of those things. And I also serve as state CIO. Before this, though, I have spent my career in state government. And so I started off at the Attorney General's office back in 1999. And so my journey to get here has been an interesting one, which is why I love this topic on inclusivity, because to me, looking at diversity and inclusivity, it's kind of been the pattern of my career, in that I am a language major who went to law school, who then worked for the state attorney general's office, who then transferred into technology. And that certainly is a diverse background, and one that makes me unique with some of the other folks that I serve with, because I don't have the typical background that folks necessarily have in technology. But I'm also, in addition to those things professionally, I am a wife. I'm a mother of triplets, and I have had to kind of work to balance all of those things throughout my career. And I've been fortunate that I have had folks throughout my journey in state government who have been extremely supportive of me at all phases in my professional career and my personal life as well. And so to me, it's extremely important to be able to pass that on to the people at my agency, the people that I serve with throughout state government, those lessons around leadership and making sure that we're bringing all voices to the table, and because to me, it just makes us stronger and better. And so whether it's looking at diversities of background, diversities through race and gender, thought diversity, all of those things, to me, it just builds up a stronger workforce, whether in the public or private sector. So this is an issue that I care very much about in helping to promote those issues. So let me pass it off, though, to, how about Payton? Why don't you take it next?
Thanks, Amanda. And again, so excited to be here with all of you. And please feel free to populate questions. We're all teed up to be able to answer things that you have. I think when I talk about my own journey, I just have a lot of humor and appreciation for accidents. And the reason why I say that is I've had multiple careers, and I wouldn't be able to map them out and say, this is why this led to this and this led to this, except for a pure accident. And I just want people to kind of lean into that and appreciate it, is that you never know what opportunities may arise just where you are. And then sometimes when you shift and move your roots and uproot that tree, you're in a different environment, and there could be a series of accidents that introduce you to new items. I don't have a traditional background. I have lived in Texas for a long time, but also in the Midwest. But I joined the military when I was about 17 years old, young enough where your parents have to actually sign you in. And I served in the military. I actually still serve, so it's been 21 years to date. But I was on active duty for about 15 years in special operations as an intelligence officer. And again, by a series of accidents, I took a fellowship that brought me to Washington, D.C. after several combat tours in Iraq. And some in South America for Haiti earthquakes. And I landed in a senator's office and was like, oh, this animal, Congress, what does it do? And meeting all the staff, et cetera. And again, series of accidents, maneuvered, took a Pentagon job, also learning from a different angle, and then end up being in the White House under the Obama administration at the time, working in science and technology policy. Again, because that was the office that I had the opportunity to work in, I was introduced even further to the tech space in a different way. I knew defense innovation. I knew government innovation from working in the offices, but I didn't know actually Silicon Valley innovation. And so by accident, I was introduced to that because at the time the government was looking towards Silicon Valley to learn more, and had a great time and career there. But it also introduced me into past places where I've worked, Facebook, et cetera, and where I am now at Bumble, currently head of Americas for Bumble. So that's all of North America and Latin America, and very women-forward company, which is a very interesting place to work, all women all the time. But then also when we say that, what we mean also too is any marginalized communities. And we love also to our men that are with us on the team and supporting. We're running a lot of legislation. It's all about protecting women online, and look forward to speaking to you more about that and the topic of innovation. I'm going to pass to Liza now and let her do her introduction.
Thanks, Payton. Those are incredible journeys that Amanda and Payton have had. I'm Liza Willmore. Nice to meet you. I'm a senior manager with the strategy consulting practice at Accenture. Payton is being very humble, saying that, it's happened a series of accidents, but those who say fortune favors the prepared mind. So she was probably ready for each of those opportunities when they occurred. I'll tell you a little bit about me. So what I do currently is really develop roadmaps and strategies in terms of organizations when they're going in with a new business model or a new system or a complete reshaping of how they're approaching the market, either in the market space or internally. So we go in and we do analysis and we develop the strategy and roadmap. And then also at the very end, the unit implementation process. So there's the people involved, there's the process involved, and of course, the implementation of the technology itself. I have kind of combination of both of their backgrounds. In terms of my background was I studied economics in my undergrad, and it was a quantitative based background. So with mathematics as my minor, and then dabbled a few years in also electrical engineering, only because my father was at Texas Instruments. So that was introduced to me very long in early stages. When other people had playhouses or piano lessons, I had breadboards and soldering irons and soldering wires and transistors and capacitors to play with. So those who are in the field know very familiar. So I was a 7-year-old soldering those things and know exactly what to smell and what not to smell and how to count the transistors and capacitor based on the color code bands. So that was my childhood. So that brings me to the world of technology, right? Having been introduced at a very early age, I became very comfortable in playing around with tech. When the VCR broke or the DVD broke, I was always the first one in the house, like, let me go mess with it. I'll fix it. You don't have to call anybody. So I became comfortable in that environment. So then after I finished college and started a job with the legislature, I was put into a situation where I was literally fished out of water. In the legislature, everybody had a political science, a history background, or a government background, or English background, like Mandy. I had a quants background, economics and math. What am I supposed to do with this legislation? I didn't know. I literally felt like I didn't belong. So I read a lot, I studied a lot, work hard. And then I learned the process. What I really found where I could apply my skills was I know process improvements. And because I study economics, I know efficiency gains and economies of scale. So when we went through the process and I evaluated all these things, I began to see trends and patterns of how we can use technology to improve all these things. So we went from the legislature to then another government agency in the oil and gas regulations area, and then also worked with the Governor's Commission for Women for a little while, also on some of their nonprofit endeavors. And then after grad school, which I focused on a master's in business administration and technology development, is really when I dive deep from all my backgrounds of process improvements into the tech world. So I think really in summation of all my backgrounds, again, it was probably lucky and all those situations had, but what was really, really fortunate for me in terms of diversity and inclusion and engagement was that along the way, I worked hard, but somebody took a chance on me, right? Somebody thought the economics and mathematics major could do this job when everybody else is government or public policy or history. And somebody invested in me on those technology projects representing the legislature when I don't have that legislative background, and put me in charge of those projects to make those improvements. And now a lot of you probably access capital.texas.gov. So that's one of the projects that we worked on. And because I did that, I felt more confident and also more sure of my skills in that world. So I think investing in your talent early is very key. And also giving them access very early on is key in terms of making them boost their confidence level of what they can do. So all those mentors and guides, male and female, have guided me along the way. And if it weren't for them, I wouldn't be where I am today. So that's huge for me in terms of giving back in nonprofit aspects or helping other young women and young men who are pursuing their careers in technology or whatever field they choose in. I think it's a full circle aspect of continually learning, continually training, and also continually mentoring.
Absolutely. Okay. No, I think you're spot on. And there's so many things that I want to circle back to later, because I think that even though the three of us have different backgrounds, there's a lot of similarities that run through. And that is, again, folks who either took a chance on us or that we took a chance to go out there and try something that maybe wasn't within necessarily what we thought was our skill set or our comfortable zone, or maybe in Payton's case, because you don't always have a choice when you're in the military. You're going to do what's assigned to you, but you do it, right? And you build and grow. But I want to touch a little bit on what you were talking about, Liza, about the importance of equal access to education and resources with technology and industry, and what that looks like for folks at an early age. I mean, how, one thing that I know that we, in looking at our candidate pool for some of our technical positions, and I will tell you, my agency, we have a lot of technologists, but we have a lot of folks just because of the nature of what we do who aren't technologists, but who have learned it or who understand the technology, but come from more of a legal compliance contracting background. But looking at the candidate pool, sometimes the pool is not always diverse. And to me, that signals that there are either somehow, it's one of two things, or I guess there could be a multiple. One, are we not able to reach out and recruit to a more diverse pool? Or two, are we not getting to folks early enough to help provide that access, that education, that opportunity to STEM? So do y'all have thoughts on that? Maybe Liza?
Yeah, sure. I can touch on that. And, I think when people go through life, there's major mile markers, right? We've all talked about, we have families or we have school, we have all these things. Those are some major mile markers. And for a child growing up, there's major mile markers for them too. So early intervention, I think, is huge in terms of providing that access to that education, that training, so they can be exposed to it earlier. I think when you don't have that access, it probably causes intimidation later on in life because they haven't seen or touched or felt what it's like early on. And so that prepares them better in terms of from high school age up onto college age or technical schools. So Accenture, we do have programs like that, which we provide early intervention specifically for that region. So we work with Junior Achievement, Coder Dojo, and Skills to Succeed by going directly into high schools, and anybody can apply to come in to learn these programming skills at the very front end. So it's a very easy project, much like when we were young, coding in C++ or basic Hello World. It's a basic exercise they can do within 30 minutes or an hour. And we have individuals who are developers and architects guiding them through this. So really, the first thing really is, number one, boost their confidence. And number two, letting them know that they too can do this if they choose this career. But then I think you've touched on a few things, right? As individuals, specifically women, go into the workforce, then the life happens. Whether you decide to return home and be with family, or reduce your work schedule depending on the situation you're in. I mean, sometimes there's healthcare needs for the elderly within the family, right? Things happen in those major milestones. And so we also have another program called the Returnship Program. So one story you'll find on Accenture.com actually is a woman who previously was a system engineer and then took 11 years off from the workforce to be with family. And also because I believe her family was probably in the military. She said that her family moved around quite a bit for her husband's role. So she took 11 years off. And part of the returnship program is really to go out and look for these individuals who want to return to work, but then reskill them into a returnship program through an 18-month funded apprenticeship program. And now she's working with oil and gas companies doing process improvements as a business architect.
That's fantastic. That is a cause and a area that's near and dear to my heart, because I took time off after I had my kids, and it was because people at the state agency I work for brought me back and were willing to take a chance on me, and knew that, just because I took a little bit of time off to be with my kids didn't mean that I was resting, or I had knowledge loss or anything else, but that I had even more to be able to add with some of that experience. And I love that we can work on that, whether to bring folks back who have taken those times, which frequently it is moms tend to be, that women tend to take that role more, and to bring folks back into the workplace and provide them those opportunities. Payton, what about you, and sort of the whether it's returnship or looking at some of those early childhood opportunities for exposure and mirroring? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I didn't want any more doorbell rings. I do have some thoughts on that. I'll start probably with the child youth aspect. So I believe very strongly in systems, because it may not always be the parents, but it could be a system, education, extended family, friends, but systems teaching children how to think and not what to think. I think it's a really important foundation, because when you're teaching a kid what to think, you're already putting them on the trajectory and giving them tools of what they should be using to piece their puzzle together. So you're in a way that you are actually making their world a little bit smaller and putting them on a track, right? And usually it depends, it's probably the track that you saw yourself, right? So it's a historical track. So you can only give somebody what you know and you experience. Like you can't give, personally, you can't give someone an experience you haven't had. But if you're teaching them how to think, what it will do is it'll broaden your horizons. And now you're looking to how do you seek assistance of making sure that they're introduced to other places and other people that can provide maybe an experience that you are not able to give them. Again, in this how to think and not what to think. I think another key thing is letting children and youth, and this really actually goes all the way up to us as adults, is get uncomfortable in the sense of learning when to lead and when to follow at all times in their life. So I think that there's some aspects of, there's always like lead, boss. And for some cultures, that is not a good overlap to how the culture works. Like sometimes that is off-putting to some cultures. And then in other cultures, being the follower, right? If that culture is a different culture, being a follower may be looked down upon or may be highly respected. And so I just wanted to raise both of those as equal parts, and two sides of a coin, and how they're so powerful and so important. And the reason why I bring that up is if we're not pushing that into youth, they may feel that if that role requires a leader, I don't feel like I'm a leader inside, I can't go into that space, right? Or if this role, somehow society has said this is for followers, I'm not a follower, I feel like I'm this leader, I can't go into this space, not realizing that there's quiet leadership and there's a loud follower, right? That there's those aspects. And I think the other thing is when I bring to that is that it's not too late. I definitely agree with some of the comments on this panel that their language, math acquisition, you know what I mean? There are some even athletic, there's certain things that do kind of taper off, right? Like you kind of miss a certain key elements earlier, and you may not be able to reach to that same capacity as if you had it younger. But I think the goal here is it's not too late, and that's why I bring in those items of like teach them how to think, not what to think, right? Lead versus follow, is because it's not too late to change whatever your circumstances. I think I'll round that up to as we come to children. So I was one of the people who had children very late. I have a toddler at home, right? And I'm much more depth into my senior part of my career. So wish me luck, right? But now I've got to figure out how to balance, having a young one and then being at this point in my career that's much more advanced. But I think it's one of those things that it's not too late, right? It's not too late for me to figure that out. It's not too late for me to seek assistance on how to figure that out. It's not too late for you or others to switch a career because you want to and just try it, right? It's not too late to make yourself a bit uncomfortable and say, I want to be the tech background person who goes into policy, right? Like the example that she was given, or I'm going to take myself out of a combat zone and I'm going to sit in front of Congress, right? I definitely was alone there and didn't fit in. And then I'm going to take that oddity and go sit in Silicon Valley and go work at Facebook. Again, these weren't places that were looking for me, but it didn't matter, right? I was showing up.
That's exactly right. No, I love that. And I love what you talked about with leadership around that, because I think, you really hit on something there. So part of it is, I think, in both the private and the public sector is changing the conversation on leadership. And I think people have this mindset of leadership as somebody, it's like a command and control type mentality, but there's such a larger skill set that goes into being a leader, and people can develop those skills to be a leader in whatever role you have now. So I tell my team all the time, I'm a big believer that leadership is a mindset and not a position. And so you can lead from all of your different roles, whether you are actually a positional leader or you are a follower, that you can own. And, that to me, that the logical outcome is that you're owning your responsibilities, right? You are demonstrating to others through the way that you handle your tasks that you are a leader. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a leader of people, right? But it's those critical skills like communication, problem solving, relationship building. Those are transferable across all industries. So, for folks who are looking for that kind of mid-career change, to me, those are the critical skills to build on throughout your career, because those are translatable to all the different things that you can do. So I think that changing the conversation around leadership and what leaders look like would be really critical to helping folks advance. And I also think, and I've had this conversation with some folks who are early in their careers here at this agency, where they have in their mind a particular title or a position or something that is success, like to them, because this is what they've always seen to, and this is my goal, this is my idea of success. And kudos to them for having that vision. I think we all should have a goal and a dream, but I think we have to be able, to pivot and to realize, really look internally, which can be tough on that self-reflection, is what is it you're really looking for out of that role? Is it just a positional thing, or what are the characteristics of success? What does success look like for you? Because once you break down to what's underlying that title and what it means to you, the world opens up, because you may realize it's not just that one thing that you were chasing, but there's so many other different possibilities, and you have the skills that you could apply to these different ones. So I could talk about this all day. I love that topic. We have a question from someone that I'd love to throw out. So the question here is, what sort of steps can an organization take day to day to try to be a more attractive workforce? Which I think is great. So what can we do sort of as a day to day, like right now, to be some place that folks want to work? Do y'all want to dive in?
Yeah, I'll do mine. It'll be shorter. I think that the first big step is to say, we want to be that place, pause, bring everybody together, right? And take in ideas of how we can get people who don't look like us around the table. So the reason I bring that up is that the pause is important because we all have so many other priorities, and you've got business priorities as well, right? So if you don't take the pause and let that marinate and sink in, and then task people to do it and bring them together, you're never really going to make an effort that's company-wide. It will fall on your D&I team, it will fall on your people team, but it won't be like a whole of office effort. And then the third is, the reason I challenge it is because you can look at metrics, you can look at speaking opportunities, you can look at research, you can look at recruitment and things like that. But I think the starkest idea is if you look around your room and people are looking the same. I don't mean just like ethnic, it could be education, right? It could be caste, creed, right? Regional. If you're looking around your table and you're not seeing people who aren't like you, right? Then that means that you're not there, right? And so the reason I say that is because some companies spend months and months and months on reports and studies, et cetera, over years. When if you look around your leadership table, you probably have the answer right there. If you look at the second rung down, you probably have your answer right there. And is anyone able to migrate from that bottom rung to the top? No. And so that's having been in some really fast moving institutions and working on diversity stuff from the White House, here at Bumble, et cetera. I think that's been a pretty blatant thing, especially like XXX, like Black woman, veteran, of looking around and seeing if you see that. But I'd love to hear from my panel colleagues on some observations they have too.
Yeah, so quick thought around that I've done here at my agency is I do one-on-one meetings with all of my employees. They're usually about 20 minutes, and I have 5 questions that I ask them. And the goal behind it was actually what Christina over in the Q&A asked, is to make it a more attractive place to work, make it someplace where people feel included and feel valued, and a place that they want to work. Because I want to hear from my employees. So to your point, Payton, look around the room, ask the folks that are already working there, and then be willing. Here's the part: you got to be open and vulnerable and willing to make change. You have to be willing to at least listen openly, not be defensive, and think that there might be some things that you can change. So I ask my folks, I want to know, what are we doing well? What can we do better? What do you think about our recruitment and rewards program, or retention and rewards? Where are we going as an agency in 5 years, and where are you in 5 years? And those 5 questions have really been so helpful to me in helping to guide my agency and make some changes. And really, it's my team being open and candid and willing to share. And they do share. they don't hold back, even when they're talking to the boss. So I really I appreciate the team's input. Lisa, how about you?
Yeah, I think you brought in some really great points, both Payton and Amanda. When Amanda talked a little bit in terms of leadership, it's not, and Payton talked about it, it's not just leading. Sometimes it's following, depending on the role, right? Maybe some of you have done the exercise, the bushfire exercise, where you and 10 friends are stuck in a cabin. The bushfire just started. You have these supplies. Now, what do you do? How do you get out? Some of the people are going to be more vocal. Some people are more reticent. But one of my greatest mentors that taught me that leaders are not always the loudest. Leaders lead by influence. And those, because they take a moment to look at the situation and look at those decisions that are made and how is it affecting everybody. And I completely agree. You need to sit and take a moment and take a look around to see how many people look like you, how many people look like others, and are we giving everybody equal voice at the table? It goes back to those fundamental skills that me and Mandy talked about, right? Those communication skills and engagement and those one-on-ones in terms of what's working for you, what's not working for you, and what can we do better? But not everybody is going to speak up in those meetings or those roundtables. You have to give some of those people a moment to digest, to think about the information. But as a leader, I believe you have to be more proactive in following up if you haven't heard. Yeah. If you haven't heard those individuals, doesn't mean they don't have a thought. They have a thought.
Right.
Maybe they weren't comfortable in sharing it. So you want to take all those inputs into consideration when making those changes and all those policy updates, right? And another thing we had done previously when I was working at an agency, when we were having a hard time retaining people or even recruiting people. And we found out, one of the things that a lot of organizations do, and it's not just in public, private they do exit interviews, but we should do stay interviews. Yes. Because at the point of exit, it's too late. I guarantee you 6 months prior to the exit, that person had already thought about the things leading up to that exit. Mm-hmm. Had you had that touch point 6 months ahead, you would have caught that person. of
Right.
the things of what are we doing well, what can we do better, and what would you like to see changed. So I think having those open conversations about inclusion, diversity, and engagement, and it's about everybody at the table. It's not just women's groups. It's an everybody group. Everybody group should be at the table, because the leadership panels and those that are working that aren't all women. There's a lot of different people in the workplace, and it varies by gender, varies by age, varies by ethnic backgrounds. Everybody should have a seat to have that conversation and build the future together.
Absolutely. More questions we've got from Tara. I love what you're saying about changing the mindset on what leadership means in government workplaces, which are very structured around job titles and hierarchies. What are some ways the organization itself can promote this way of thinking? Great question. So I think, at least for me, speaking from the government perspective, and one of the things that we do here at DIR is we have focus groups. And we make sure that we pull focus groups from all areas and positions throughout the agency on various topics, again, to try to foster that culture where no matter where you are or who you are in the organization, you feel comfortable speaking your mind. We also build different committees around a variety of topics. And then I think it goes back to, again, those asking the questions. That's one of the things why I wanted to have those conversations and the one-on-ones with my employees, is because I want to also model the behavior for the rest of my staff, for my direct reports and everyone else, and the rest of the managers when they're working with folks, to bring that culture where we're going to ask you questions and we're going to do more listening than we're going to do talking to hear from you. Doesn't mean we're going to implement everything. Doesn't mean that we can't implement anything, because the reality is, as government, we do have, a variety of, whether it's through statute, constitution, rule, and certain things that we just, it's a way we have to work, and some things that we can't change. But I think the other key thing for us is working on building those retention strategies. Recruitment is extremely important, but also retention and workforce and career progression. So I think having a strong team, whether it's through HR, it's our people and culture team, to really drive on building up our workforce to know that they have a future here, they have a career here, and working with them again on that question, where do you see yourself in 5 years, so that we can help to cultivate the current staff that we have. Payton or Lisa, did you have anything around that?
I think the comment I have on it is, I find that sometimes leadership tends to try to say why things aren't changing, and try to explain why things aren't changing when we're talking about diversity or lifting people up, based on, like I said, metrics or whatever, because they're trying to let people understand it's not that easy. They're not just randomly pulling levers, et cetera, that they're trying to build a structure. So I share that. I know that sometimes when leadership tries to do that, it sometimes doesn't land as well with the people who are advocating for change or who are concerned. And so I do say that that's probably a growth point, right? As I think of even of ourselves as leaders and the companies we work for and everyone on this panel, is that there's something that comes with being in leadership that wants you to let people understand the system that they're working in, and why there might be challenges. It's part of what you do, right? It's part of how you manage. But to consider that it may not be the message that people want to hear. They want to hear the message of change. And so maybe being comfortable and not spending half of the meeting or sensing session on that, but taking in their inputs of like what things may be able to change and actually bringing them in on the process. It's going to be probably messy, right? Because they may not be at that tier that knows all of the inputs, right? But allowing some space. It can't be on your ESG or outward facing items. Obviously, those are going to be much more structured, but allow that there could be some messiness, a pocket of it where you're letting team members, et cetera, experiment with some of their ideas of how they can either there's some groups where they're saying, hey, you're not ready for this leadership role, but we want to put you in a mentoring pipeline, right? Or you are in that role, but we want to send everyone to finishing school, right? Like whatever these ideas are for folks, I feel like putting that in a trajectory to do proof of concept sooner, right? And more quickly is something that I think think maybe leaders could get more comfortable with versus trying to get something very, very perfect that's for external consumption, which takes time. And then you kind of lose a lot of the newness and the richness that some of the teams are and the more junior folks are trying to surface.
Right. I love that. Just being authentic with your team, right? And listening. That's great. Okay. We have a question about, are there any organizations in Texas that I can connect with to help prepare more women for careers in tech, math, and engineering? So Liza, you talked a little bit about some of the efforts that Accenture is doing and working with folks, but what about some other organizations as well? Are y'all familiar with other groups that are out there on this?
Yeah, so actually Texas Workforce Commission is huge in that area. They have a Texas Science Fair where they've gone into high schools to really promote math and science to the young folks who are interested in. For women who are interested in careers in tech, math, and engineering, there's also local clubs in terms of women in technology. In Austin, there's an AWT organization. I'm also part of another group called Conrad Foundation, where we evaluate business and technology plans and innovation. And there's also a group nationally called Women in Technology and Innovations. So you can look those up, Marcia, and see if you can connect those. If not, happy to look me up on LinkedIn and I can connect you to a few of those organizations.
Right. I'm trying to think of there's, what is it? Austin Diversity in Tech.
Div Inc. There's quite a Div Inc. And
right. Blacks in Tech, Latinas in Tech, Girls Who Code. There's a lot of things out there that we could help you connect with. All right. Sarah asked, how has the pandemic affected your efforts in building a more inclusive workplace? Has it helped or hurt in any ways? I have thoughts on this. Liza, you want to go first?
I do. This actually jumps off the previous question in terms of the workforce and job descriptions, and also leads into this. What I think the pandemic has done is given us a great opportunity. For those that we've lost and the challenges we face, those are very, very tough moments. But let's look on the flip side of that coin. It's actually a great opportunity in terms for organizations, for leaders to really look at the full platform and see how they're operating, right? I don't mean in terms of job descriptions, in terms of ladders, meaning clerk 1 to clerk 2 to clerk 3, or engineer 1 to engineer 2, engineer 3. Because of the pandemic, a lot of individuals' jobs have changed. In fact, I'm willing to guarantee everybody's job has changed a little bit because of the pandemic. Everybody has shifted a little bit. So I really challenge those in the leadership positions, whether administration or in HR positions, to really take a look at, and they should be doing this annually. So we call these a talent strategy and roadmap. And it goes back to what Payton said, this is a change. And I do this every day. I do change strategy and transformation. And I'm telling you, she's right. It is scary, right? When you're talking about change, you're talking about, is my job changing? Is my boss changing? Is my life changing after this? It doesn't have to be any of those. In fact, any of the change I've done, people have actually not lost skills or lost positions. They actually amplified their roles if the change is managed correctly. If you have those personal stakeholders and also those inputs up front already mapped out, you can do change very well, where each individual comes out actually better with a better pay and a better role in the outcome. So it starts with talent strategy and development and planning. So you need a full roadmap in terms of evaluating what your job descriptions are. How has the pandemic changed the individuals? What do their jobs look like? And you need to really look at in terms of their knowledge, skills, and abilities, and how to help it be more inclusive. How has that individual's job changed, and how can we make it better? So for somebody, for example, who's a system analyst 1, well, that doesn't have to be a great ladder that goes from 1 to 2 to 3. The ladder, think of it as a matrices, because that system analyst 1 could become a database administrator, or become a business architect, or become a product manager. But those paths are not a ladder. They're going this way, that way, or this way. Kind of like Payton said, her career, if you were to map out, it probably spreads out like this, and not so much like a linear line. So think of this as an opportunity in terms of how you can reshape your organization and developing really the future for your talent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I have a thought too on how has COVID changed. So I want to be very specific and talk about maybe more tech type of roles or office roles, because I do acknowledge that there's some that work in fields that there's been adverse effect because of COVID. I mean, my husband is in, the home remodeling, world, right? So, feast or famine, right? So I just want to first acknowledge, people in healthcare, food service, et cetera. It's a different type of calculus and response. Which this is not. So this is more focused on the tech and innovation folks that we're working on. I think with COVID, things have shifted probably in a good way for employees, in the sense that the competition is real and it's fierce, because several people have been forced or decided to leave the workforce. They have taken the opportunity, as we've been discussing in this panel, to explore different things, and that might be working for themselves or working for a different company. And so now it's no longer like Lisa, you're talking about this example, it's no longer you're going to hold on and grit your fingers and your teeth for 10 years to try to get that director role in the same position, right? And wait for someone to retire out or quit to get it, right? And then because the company knows they have that held over you, right? Then your quality of life and things like that change, because you're waiting for that one thing. Amanda, it goes back to you too, like that one title that you were waiting for, because somebody said this is what success is, and someone said this is the path. And I think post-COVID, what it is it's kind of like shook everyone up, where they realize, like, not to be the geek that I am, but like it's the Matrix, right? Like they can see the zeros and the ones, right? Like they can actually see that now and realize, like, that title does not have to mean success. And that title, I could do it at 10 other workplaces and not at this one, right? I can do that work without this title at this other place for more pay or more benefits or just more peace of mind. And I actually think it's been a COVID in that sense. It's given people that opportunity to pause and reassess what they want out of life. And it's causing companies to have to be more competitive of how they are doing recruitment and also retention. And I think that's a good thing, because I think things have gotten a little complacent. Again, you have to wait your 10 years to get the one role.
Exactly. For us in government, that I can speak to on pandemic, I think it forced government to go to where the private sector was, especially around teleworking, which to me really helps with inclusivity. Because it opens up for folks who are working on, maybe who have parenting at home or different issues that they have, that gives them a little more flexibility in their workplace. Telework was not, our agency did telework prior to the pandemic. We continued obviously throughout the pandemic, but it opened it up to a lot of other government agencies to allow folks a little bit more of that flexibility. When it came to scheduling, in particular, I'm looking, now for parents who had to, you're dealing with childcare issues, or you've got all these other things, or you have maybe someone elderly in your family that you're taking care of, and it provides that flexibility. So to me, I think that actually the pandemic has helped with that inclusivity. The other thing, kind of on the less tangible piece of it, is that throughout the pandemic, we earlier, before we started the call, we met Payton's dog, and which is a wonderful thing. And you might hear, and I know Lisa and I have talked about that, our dogs before, or you might hear a baby crying or different things going on in the background. And I think part of that, for me, on building that, a diverse and inclusive work culture, is meeting people where they are and understanding that we all come from different backgrounds, and we all have a lot of things that are going on in our lives that's not just our professional lives. And so to me, I think if you look at it from the positive place and sort of the outcome that should have come, is that we are more understanding about what everyone is dealing with, and maybe extending a little more grace to folks through things, which to me just builds on that, culture of inclusivity to give people that space that they need. So I for all of its many, many challenges and sadnesses, I think that there's been some pluses as well. Okay. Question from Lee. Leaning into Tara's question and what you were saying, Amanda and Payton, what actions can we take as individual employees, not necessarily in leadership positions, to encourage or promote inclusivity in our current workplaces? So this is sort of a grassroots efforts. What do y'all think?
I'll take that one, because definitely have been there and was there for a long time. That's why I always bring up this 10-year waiting for a job, right? So I was at that grassroots for a long time. So I think there's one thing is to identify what system you work in. So because I have a strong government background, so from military and all the government, I do think that there is a good thing to understand what system you're in, because you don't want to feel you can completely break a system, right? That may already have certain set items. And so the reason I say that is, it could be stressful for you and stressful for the folks in it. So you should really identify what the system is. It doesn't mean that you don't push for change, but your strategy on how to push for change might be colored by what your system is. So I want you first to identify what type of system you are in. The military one's a very easy one. It's almost a trope. People know what that is. But also, as I found when I worked in Congress, there's an invisible system, right? People aren't wearing their rank and things like that, but there is hierarchies and things like that, your ledge directors, et cetera. So you just have to kind of understand that system and then try to maneuver. And then also working in startups and tech is understand when there is no system, right? How do you deal with chaos and try to weave your way through there? And what I will tell you is that even when it looks like there is no system or structure, there is. It's just invisible. So it's this identifying. I used to say it's called reading the room, and I just really think that's a really key exercise. Mapping, it's probably Lisa's world, right? Of really mapping, what you're dealing with first before you try to engage. Just because there can be a lot of negative consequences and things like that, and you don't want to put yourself or others in a bad spot. But after you've done that homework, I think there's two things. One is I think it's important to have allies. I've been in both places where I tried it on my own and then try to have an ally. And the ally is a little bit different than a mentor. A mentor can be an ally, but it's not always. Like a mentor could be on the outside periphery giving you advice, but they're not necessarily someone in the system who will call your name during that meeting, right? Bring you to a meeting. And the reason why I say that is you want to build a team to try to make that change. Again, from learning from past experiences of trying to do things alone, et cetera. And I think the biggest thing is you find out your allies. They're going to also tell you what is really happening, right? So you think you see how things are working. That person is an ally. Usually, especially if you pick a more senior ally, are going to say like, hey, this is how the leadership is viewing it. This is how the other people are viewing it. And they will help you build a strategy of say, I want X. Here's the best route to do X, right? Because the reason why I'm being so cautious here is I in my younger days, which was just like 2 years ago. I wasn't actually young, but in my mind, I really thought you could just push against the system, push and change it. And I didn't really fully, even though I talked about it and was part of it, have mentored people, I really, in the last few years, have really grown into the sense of like what it means to really work with an ally and to work a room, right? And then all of the subtle things that are going on in a room to get toward that person to say yes, and all the people who are helping groom that. And so I've seen some, and this is why I have a lot of belief in people who follow, and I want to encourage that that's not a negative connotation when I say leaders and followers, is because some of those followers are very good and brilliant at reading a room and learning how to shift things in a place where the leader thinks that they decided it and that they came up with the idea. So I didn't give you a key solution. I mostly am just giving you some techniques as you come to that, but I didn't solve your problem. But I'll turn it over to my colleagues to add their 2 cents or 3 to that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think that it's definitely great advice, and on inclusivity, I mean, again, because so much of what we've talked about is, it's cultural inclusivity, it's education, it's background, it's all of those different things. So maybe within the teams that you have, just making sure you're pulling in and asking right there, start sort of the groundswell, asking other folks for opinions on whether it's a work project or something else, to try to bring more voices to the table. And maybe folks that even on your team that you wouldn't always ask for something for help with, or their opinion on a project that you're working with, you might go ahead and try reaching out that way and see if that doesn't, one, give you a unique and new perspective you hadn't thought of, and two, start again modeling that behavior throughout the organization where inclusivity is everywhere.
Yeah, I like what the panelists have said. What you should probably look up these 2 terms, why sponsorship and mentorship are both important. What Payton was telling you about in terms of the allies, those are sponsors. Basically, they're leaders with your organization, they're influencers, they're the voice that others respect and listen to in terms of their large decision making. Now, why are those both important? Because you need your sponsors at the table to advocate for you, but you also need the mentors to help you bounce the ideas you want to present to the group, and as a confidant, as a friend, who can give you real feedback as to yeah, I would tone that down, or I would tone this up, and here's how I would rephrase these things. So both of those are important. There's actually a really great book about it. So I recommend you take a look at that to really help refine. And I think Payton actually, again, being humble, she gave you a roadmap as to how to do this. You want to look at your system because I've been there too. I've been in government. And like I said, I wasn't from government background, so I didn't know how government works. So I only learned from my mistakes and for those mentors and sponsors who challenged me and stretched me and taught me how to refine myself. So find those two individuals are really important, sponsors and mentors within your organization. I think and then follow her recipe in terms of mapping out your organization and where you fit in that as to when you can probably voice your changes.
No, great advice. On this one, I think this panel will be open for a while after the presentation, so I may have to go back and take notes from this since I'm busy focusing on, but there's great advice here. So we have two questions that are sort of related around one, what are some programs that women employee resource groups can start to attract young women into the workforce, whether it's tech, science, or finance? And then, relatedly, that can to start to attract immigrant women into the workforce, whether it's STEM or business, et cetera. So what about some programs or resources? I know for us, we certainly try to reach out, as I mentioned, to some of those groups before, whether it's job postings there, becoming involved in some of the different, women in tech type groups to put that information out there. Also visiting, for us with HBCUs as part of our recruitment efforts, junior colleges, community colleges. But how about in the private sector? What are y'all seeing?
Well, I'll start. So we have a program for that too. We actually have partnered with Upwardly Mobile, Globally Mobile. And what we have done is in terms of the refugees that recently came out of Afghanistan, we are helping them, right, in terms of coaching them how to refine their resume, how to present the skills that are translatable that my panelists have talked about, whether it's technical skills or the soft skills which they possess, into a career here and now in the United States. And now we're providing that mentoring and that one-on-one touch point to check in and to help them refine the elevator speech, to refine their presentation in terms of their resume and their skills, to land that first job and starting a new life. So what I recommend is if you have a community engagement director or an external relations director, see what you can do in the community for those. Within Austin, I know that there's a lot of organizations that work with some of the refugee groups that come out of, really, really tough situations, and everybody in those situations really needs some help and advice from professionals like yourselves.
Mm-hmm. Great advice. All right, we're running. We've got looks like about 8 minutes. What are some of the qualities of your favorite mentors, and what were of your favorite mentees? Payton, can you?
Yeah. I will say one of my favorite mentors. I'm just going to out one of, so that way no one feels left out. But she was actually the former the nation's chief technology officer. So she led the technology space in the White House when I worked there. This wasn't someone that I knew before. And I'm also the type of person who's like, oh, if there's a club, then I don't want to join it, right? And so I wasn't a joiner, never happened. I work in the national security space, intelligence officer. I'm usually the person watching and observing. But one day I was watching and observing, and I thought this person used to be a VP at Google. This person was like the first of this, MIT, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And she was so open to just random people, and I say random, just like very young staff in the room. She would talk to them. She would take their business card. This is not normal. This is not normal behavior. Very, very senior administration officials, because they all have handlers, right? To manage that kind of thing, to keep distance. She would call on people who didn't have certain levels in the room. She would ask them their opinion. She would include them on documents. And it was very rogue behavior. I wanted to be a zoologist originally, long story, when I was in high school. And I found myself taking note. I'm like, we're in this very senior meeting. And this chick went over to this intern and asked her opinion, right? included her in the conversation when there's heads of state in the room, right? And I saw her moving in this maverick way that I thought, now she's an outsider, and she's coming from, the Silicon Valley, et cetera. And so it wasn't an accident. She was very consciously doing that. I've become friends with her since. And the reason why I say that is, I was just like, oh, this anomaly, I thought it was neat. I thought it was great. But then to find out later, as I became friends with her, is that she was purposely doing that. I think that's what the women on this panel have talked about. She very much knew what her power was and her influence was, and that she was breaking norms, and she was going to bring that minority person, and I was one of those, right, to that table, include them in there, or that young person, or that young LGBTQ, person in that community, and bring them in there. She was very purposeful through her whole time there, and so. From the outside, it's something that you thought she was in there just doing the meeting, but the meeting was her doing diversity work and doing inclusive, right? But on surface, you just thought she was in there doing whatever the topic was on the piece of paper. But her real work was breaking the system. So still always a big fan of that. And I have lots of mentees, but the ones that that particularly stand out to me are the ones that are just a little bit lost. They're not sure what they want to do, and they don't even know how to approach you or have a meeting, and they still put themselves out there and put themselves on a phone call. You can see them maybe stuttering or feeling uncomfortable. I mean, when I see that, my heart just opens completely, because you think about, there's people who are just extroverts, except myself included. It doesn't take us much to be able to have a conversation. But when I see someone who's not that, and they're struggling, and they put themselves in a position to try to get a proximity to someone who's got power information, those are, I love all the mentees, but that I have a great respect for. And I again, that soft power, right? Those people who that's not their strength, right? But they're stepping into a space that's uncomfortable to try to progress themselves. I won't name those folks, right? But there are several of those, and I've gained a great respect for this soft power, right? This follower who's really a leader, but you think they're a follower, right? A kind of a space. And culturally, I've worked a lot overseas, Middle East, et cetera, Asia. And again, I think it's something because of the American viewpoint, right? It's you see leaders a certain way, but there's just like amazing manipulation in a great way that can happen from some of the follower team. So those are my two.
I love that. Lisa, I know we're short on time. Can you think of just a quality for your mentor and mentee?
Yeah, I have a really great mentor that I think about. It's one of the ones I mentioned before, that leads by influence. He really looked at people's capabilities and abilities, and not for what they're doing now, but for their potential. Mm-hmm. He really liked to stretch people. He stretched me to a point where I thought I wasn't going to make it. But, he was there then to lend you a hand and pull you up. And one of the stories he told me when he was first guiding me about 15 years ago when I first met him, he said, there was one person I mentored, and then he's now here in the White House. He's doing this. And I saw him at one of these press meetings, and I said to him, wow, Scotty, you really made it, huh? Now look at you. You're doing all these things. And it's like, oh no, he plays it down. And I look back to that moment, and I didn't really understand what that meant. And of course, he's probably really proud of him. But now I think back, some of the best mentees I've ever had are those that have done even better and greater things. That's when I know I've made a difference. So the ones that come back and ask me for a recommendation, I'm doing this, I'm going to go do this global thing with the UN or Peace Corps. I'm like, go you. Go you. I will absolutely recommend you. And I am so flattered and honored that you would ask me to recommend you, even though it was 10 years ago when we interacted. So, as a leader or influencer, think about those every engagement. Someone else had told me one time also, every engagement you have is an interview. Think of every engagement you have is something that you can do in terms of influencing somebody else to make them feel better, feel them worthwhile, make them feel like they are valued. So be authentic in your engagements.
Love that. Authenticity, leadership, inclusivity, all of those things. I thinking back on mentors that, again, had that belief in the potential and could see more than we could and in ourselves. I think that those are all huge lessons and truly valuable. And I really think that all of us have that opportunity, going back to, again, that leadership being a mindset. We could all be kind of mini mentors through every phase of all throughout our days, right? Because we have the power to be able to influence people's lives for better or worse through every encounter that we have throughout the day. And I think taking those opportunities, particularly in the workplace, to build people up and to help them pursue their true potential is really just, it's an obligation, I think, of those in management to do so. So thank you both. Thank you, Payton. Thank you, Lisa. This was a great conversation. And I truly appreciate it. Thank you all also in the audience for the tremendous questions.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mandy and Payton and Lisa, for joining us today and having this much needed conversation. I saw a couple of questions in the chat about whether or not this will be available to go back and review, and we are recording this. We've recorded all of our sessions, so you will be able to go back and take a look and review and take as many notes as you'd like. Look out for a follow-up email from us after this forum is done. We will give you instructions on how to access the recordings and where you can find them. A big shout out and thank you to everybody on the back end. Mostly that's our Texas Film Commission folk. I'm Christina McKinney with the Governor's Commission for Women. I've had the pleasure of working with the Film Commission now for the second time on our second Women in Tech and Innovation Forum. And thank you all for coming to our 2022 WITI Forum. And we hope to do our next one in person. We would like to continue the conversation. So if you have time, stop in that networking lounge. Talk with your peers and every other attendees in those networking chat rooms. They'll be open for the rest of the day and probably the remainder of the week. And I just thank you all again for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye, y'all.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.